por fin estamos reunidos en la fiesta más grande de emprendimiento e innovación de los empresarios mexicanos. Así que con un aplauso damos el inicio a esta que es la Semana Nacional del Emprendedor 2015. Bienvenidos.
Puntos México Conectados son una red de 32 centros de inclusión e innovación digital. Hay uno en cada estado de la República y este es parte de un compromiso presidencial que ya fue cumplido, la creación de esta red. Están operando ya con diferentes actividades que van desde la robótica, el emprendimiento, la programación y la inclusión digital, desde lo más básico hasta lo más avanzado. Si todavía no los conoces, busca pmc.gov.mx y conoce el más cercano.
Hola, mi nombre es Marina Boido, mi empresa se llama Monona y el año pasado apliqué a la convocatoria 2.2 del INADEM y fui beneficiada y gracias a eso estoy ahorita participando con este staff en la Semana del Emprendedor y también voy a tener un espacio en el Foro del Éxito.
Electrobike, más que una bicicleta, ya es un medio de transporte urbano que va a permitir a toda la gente poderse mover en bicicleta y llegar a su trabajo sin llegar sudado o cansado. Tiene una batería y un motor. Tú cargas directamente esta batería a la luz de 2 a 4 horas y con eso vas a tener entre 30 a 40 kilómetros de autonomía. Tenemos varios modelos y nuestro modelo de negocio es agencias de bicicletas eléctricas, donde tenemos talleres, centros de servicio, refacciones, planes de financiamiento para personas, empresas y gobierno, y también tenemos seguro contra robo y accidentes. Nosotros estamos aquí junto con el INADEM. El INADEM nos ha apoyado, nos ha dado varios apoyos. Ya con eso hemos podido crear nuestro modelo de franquicias. Con eso también, con este apoyo también hemos podido llegar a Estados Unidos. Ya abrimos nuestros primeros 3 puntos de venta por allá y ahora estamos yendo hacia Centro y Sudamérica con el concepto de Electrobike.
Para nosotros es de gran interés que los emprendedores que vienen y que quieren iniciar una empresa visiten nuestro stand de fábrica de empresas. En este ecosistema el emprendedor y los empresarios encontrarán básicamente soluciones para aquellos que van a iniciar su negocio y que lo van a tener como puesta en marcha. También tenemos una serie de dinámicas y de apoyos para aquellos que tienen ya negocio en operación, que cuentan con menos de un año de operación. También encontrarán una serie de apoyos para poder formalizar su negocio y también encontrarán explicaciones para poder tener acceso a recursos, ya sea vía subsidio o financiamiento, para poder hacer crecer su negocio.
Fundador es una fundación internacional que promueve el desarrollo económico mediante los empleos de alto impacto. Y en este sentido operamos en México desde el 2002, llevamos el reconocimiento como aceleradora de alto impacto por parte del INADEM desde el 2013 y ha sido una alianza muy interesante porque por parte del INADEM podemos hacer que nuestras empresas de alto impacto tengan recursos para consultoría, para CAPEX, para una cantidad de apoyos que les permitan crecer más rápido y también porque abrimos un capítulo de inversionistas del cual muchos de los fondos que se sumaron a esta iniciativa, que se llama el Endeavor Investor Network, han sido fondos apoyados por el INADEM. Entonces es una relación de mutuo beneficio.
Hola, bienvenidos al stand de escalamiento. Mi nombre es Carmen García y yo soy la coordinadora de este ecosistema. En este ecosistema podrás encontrar incubadoras de alto impacto y aceleradoras de empresas. Tenemos más de 60 organizaciones que están aquí a tu disposición para que puedas venir a preguntar sobre cómo iniciar tu negocio o si ya tienes una empresa, buscar aceleración nacional o internacional. Tenemos espacios lúdicos, unas actividades como tómate un café con un emprendedor y un cine en el cual estamos proyectando diferentes documentales y también tenemos ejercicios de levantamiento de capital. El día de ayer tuvimos un levantamiento de capital de más de $1 millón para 3 empresas. Así que los esperamos a que vengan aquí, nos visiten y conozcan organizaciones como Venture Institute, Impact Hub, Spark Up, Endeavor, New Ventures y muchos casos de éxito como Ilu México, Pizza More y también tenemos Electrobike.
Hola, mi nombre es Diego Alvarado, soy socio fundador de Proyectil, una empresa que se dedica a hacer proyectos de ingeniería o desarrollo de proyectos con base tecnológica. Bueno, enfocado en esto, que es como la primera instancia de Proyectil, generamos una impresora 3D que nos ayuda a generar estos prototipos. La impresora 3D pues es una tecnología que está llegando con mucho auge, que tiene infinitas aplicaciones y que nosotros ocupamos justamente para generar las soluciones que el cliente nos pide. Podemos desarrollar desde prototipos completamente funcionales, mecatrónicos o robóticos, prótesis 3D justamente para rehabilitación de pacientes, maquetas, piezas como artesanales. Se pueden hacer millones de cosas y en realidad depende de qué es lo que tú quieras hacer y para qué quieras usar la tecnología.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Angélica García y bueno, yo me encuentro en el stand de Pronafim. El stand es el número 2006 y quiero invitarlos a que nos visiten todos los emprendedores que están aquí en la Semana del Emprendedor, porque Pronafim es un programa que quiere apoyar a todos los microempresarios que tengan un negocio pequeño, que buscan hacerlo crecer, o bien esas personas que quieren hacer un negocio nuevo, pequeño, pero que quieren un crédito que los haga ahora sí que desarrollar ese proyecto. Lo único que tienes que hacer es tener un proyecto productivo y acercarte con nosotros. Nosotros te vamos a apoyar a través de unas instituciones microfinancieras que están con nosotros, que les otorgamos una línea de crédito para que dispersen ese apoyo entre todo nuestro público objetivo, que son ustedes, los emprendedores que buscan crecer. Además se pueden vincular a través de la red del apoyo al emprendedor y ahí también nos pueden encontrar. Ojalá que nos puedan visitar aquí en nuestro stand 2006, como les digo, y somos nosotros el Pronafim de la Secretaría de Economía.
La verdad se me ha hecho súper interesante. Hay muchísimas empresas que te apoyan como un emprendedor o un empresario que quiere ser y siempre están como buscando el beneficio tanto como para ellos como para nosotros. O sea, es un ganar-ganar. Entonces, pues es muy eficiente para, o sea, que el gobierno haga esto para todos los emprendedores y que haya más fuentes de trabajo en México.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Soy Ferenc Fejer, soy CEO de Fejer & Fejer Consulting o Consultoría. Estamos aquí en la Semana del Emprendedor muy contentos. Nosotros somos una incubadora de alto impacto hace muchos años. Somos una aceleradora de empresas y damos consultoría en general. La verdad es que para nosotros el ecosistema emprendedor mexicano es un ejemplo y hay que seguir apoyándolo, y es por eso que estamos aquí apoyando el ecosistema y apoyando desde luego emprendedores que están a lo largo y ancho de toda la República Mexicana.
Pues yo vine aquí con ideas de cómo podría crear mi empresa, porque yo tengo muchas ganas de crear una. Entonces vi demasiados negocios en los cuales me decidieron ayudar para poder lograr mi empresa. Entonces fue muy genial esta ayuda.
¿Se van contentas?
Sí, claro. Sí.
Claro. lo más importante es que tengas fe en ti, que creas en tu proyecto.
La Secretaría de Economía y el Instituto Nacional del Emprendedor les da la más cordial bienvenida a la Semana Nacional del Emprendedor, la mejor forma de abrir o hacer crecer tu negocio. Unos datos: estamos a más de 1000 puntos en la República Mexicana transmitiendo online y además se pretende romper un récord Guinness de conferencias online, así es que pónganse bonitos porque sí se va a romper el récord. Además en audiencia estamos muy bien, quiero felicitarlos y puede ser que este sea el inicio de algo muy importante para sus vidas. Son ponencias muy importantes. En este día damos inicio con la conferencia magistral titulada Exponential Organization, impartida por Salim, Ismail, y antes una pequeña sorpresa a manera de entrevista. Muchas gracias, muy buenas tardes, disfruten. Con permiso.
Sí. ¿Qué tal? Buenas tardes, ¿cómo están? Gracias a todos por estar aquí, por acompañarnos. Les voy a hablar un poquito de Startup Grind, que es la comunidad que tenemos aquí en México y en el mundo, y lo que tratamos de hacer es apoyar a fundadores de startups a que consigan inversión o a que consigan contactos o a que aprendan a reclutar a reclutar talento para sus startups. No sé, ¿me pueden ayudar con la presentación? Entonces, somos una comunidad independiente, sin embargo, tenemos una alianza con Google for Entrepreneurs a nivel global, lo cual nos permite llevar a cabo eventos alrededor del mundo. Actualmente estamos en 192 ciudades, en 87 países, tenemos más de 1,200 voluntarios y atendemos a más de 275,000 emprendedores en los temas que les comenté. Básicamente lo que hacemos es en estas 192 ciudades, hacemos lo que ahorita van a ver. Invitamos a alguien exitoso, un emprendedor, un inversionista, y platicamos un poco con él de cómo empezó, cuáles son sus antecedentes profesionales y familiares, y después hablamos de lo que ha hecho y de lo que sigue en su futuro para tratar de que él les comparta lo que sabe y lo que ha aprendido en el camino. Básicamente tenemos 3 valores: es dar antes de recibir, ayudar a otros antes de ayudarte a ti mismo y hacer amigos en lugar de hacer contactos. Este tipo de eventos son maravillosos para conocer gente, para tener realmente una red de gente que esté dispuesta a ayudarte y no necesariamente a intercambiar tarjetas de presentación. Como les comenté, básicamente lo que hacemos es eso. Se acercan ustedes a nuestra comunidad, tenemos capítulos en Ciudad de México, en San Luis Potosí, en Guadalajara, en Monterrey, Tijuana, Ensenada, y estamos por abrir uno en Mérida, aquí en México. Entonces se acercan a nuestra comunidad, nos comparten qué es lo que necesita su startup y nosotros vamos a tratar de ayudarles. Todo esto es gratis, no tiene costo, no cobramos comisiones, no cobramos nada. La idea es tratar de ayudarlos y de que su startup llegue al siguiente nivel lo más rápido posible. Los speakers que nos acompañan son gente que, como se pueden imaginar, son gente muy ocupada, que tienen muchas cosas que hacer. Entonces, les voy a pedir que le demos un muy fuerte aplauso a Salim Ismail.
Thank you. Which side?
You choose.
Okay.
Welcome to Mexico.
Thank you. Good to be here. Buenas tardes. That's all the Spanish I know, so
that's about it. Thank you very much for being here, and let's kick this off with tell us a little bit about your background, your family, your early years in Canada.
Earlier. So I'm originally from India.
Okay.
Grew up there until I was 10 years old. My parents moved to Canada. I did the rest of my schooling and university there. The minute I graduated, I left. It's too cold in Canada and too boring. Nothing ever happens. I spent 10 years in Europe restructuring large European companies. I have a degree in theoretical physics and computing. I restructured a lot of French companies. That's why I'm bald. If you've interacted with French companies, you'll understand that. And then I moved to New York City in 1999 and started doing entrepreneurship.
So what was the first thing that you do that you consider as entrepreneurship?
After 9/11, I set up a business to help companies collect the financial aid that the government promised to Lower Manhattan. And so we set up kind of a nonprofit structure, and we ended up delivering about 30% of all the money that got delivered was because of us.
And before that, you were like a regular employee, or you will bring like consulting services, or what do you do before?
I spent 5 years as an IT architect building large-scale computing systems for banks and insurance companies, and then 5 years as a management consultant trying to coach large companies. In the 90s, many large companies thought about IT as a cost, right? Whereas really it's a strategic investment. And so trying to get them to think about that was important. So I moved around in Europe a lot as a result.
And then eventually you let your entrepreneurial self become bigger, and then you moved to Silicon Valley, right?
Yeah, so I built 3 or 4 startups in New York. One of them was called PubSub. It was the predecessor to Twitter. We invented the activity stream, essentially. I found that in entrepreneurship, timing is everything. If you're a year too early, you're done. It's better to be too late than too early as an entrepreneur. And that got me well known. I moved out to Silicon Valley in 2006, and I joined Yahoo as the head of innovation, ran their incubator called Brickhouse.
So how was being part of Yahoo? Like, it was a completely different scenery in terms of what companies were hot at the moment, but I think Yahoo was one of the biggest companies creating things at that moment. So how was it to return to becoming like an employee instead of keep doing new startups?
Terrible. Big companies cannot handle innovation very well. And one thing I learned at Yahoo is when you try and do disruptive innovation in a large organization, the immune system of the company will come and attack you. Right? All of our organizations are built to withstand change and withstand risk. And we're seeing that's now the higher order bit. And so I'll give a small example. We set this off-site facility with 20 of the best developers in the world to do really interesting innovation away from headquarters. And on the second day, a truck showed up with yellow and purple corporate furniture. And we said, no, we don't want this because we want to have a very startup feel to it. And the chap said, the driver said, I have a mandate to deliver furniture within 48 hours of any office opening. Get out of my way, the furniture's coming in. And all my developers said, we're leaving, we'll come back when the furniture goes. And so terrible difficulty in this. And this is a problem that most large companies have. In the past, it has been a huge advantage to be a big company in many markets. Today, it is a huge disadvantage to be a big company. And so today, all of the advantage sits with entrepreneurs today.
Yeah, because they can move so much fast and so much easier than a big company can take decisions or make changes, right?
The speed is one thing, but the reason that we have big companies is, in theory, the transaction cost is lower because you build all of the processes under one organizational umbrella. But today, that's not the case. And so the actual fundamental rationale for having a big company is starting to disappear.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know if you've ever heard about this guy called Ash Fontana, but he have a very interesting intake on how companies, especially in the near future, like instead of having these huge companies that used to have this amazing infrastructure and they have all the assets to move through this infrastructure, now everyone will become like a very basic API, like a very basic service, and then everybody will connect and infrastructure will be like a commodity for everyone. Like
that's right.
It will not be that much valuable.
And you need today to move very fast. And this is why Google turned itself into Alphabet and broke the company up. Right? If everybody needs a centralized point of control, everything goes too slowly.
Yeah, that's correct. Okay, so moving forward, then you were in Yahoo, and what came next after Yahoo? What?
So two years at Yahoo, and while I was at Yahoo, I set up a relationship between Yahoo and NASA to do interesting projects together. NASA has millions of images, and Yahoo had Flickr users that could tag images, so we were doing some interesting projects together. And then one day, the NASA people said, hey, we're helping set up Singularity University. We're bringing 70 thought leaders from around Silicon Valley together. Do you want to come to the founding conference? And I showed up. I'd never heard of Ray Kurzweil, Peter Diamandis, the Singularity, or X Prize. And I asked a few too many questions of how will you manage all this? About 2 weeks later, the board said, do you want to run it? And so I got home that day. My wife said, how was your day? And I said, I think I'm a dean. So that was that.
I don't know what happened, but...
there you go. All of a sudden, I was running a university.
So I think you asked the right questions, right? Because they thought they were like on the spot.
Maybe, I don't know. Or they saw that I was crazy enough or something. To be an entrepreneur, you have to be quite crazy, right? So
that's a good thing.
Very important.
Okay, so Singularity started growing or started developing, and what was the original project, and do you think the original project has been executed as planned, or do you think it has been switched or pivoted?
The original idea has stayed exactly the same. The vision that we set up was we are seeing new technologies that are moving faster than ever. We are now seeing about 10 technologies doubling in the same way that we've seen computation doubling. And the world has never seen so many technologies move so fast. So if you can harness that pace of change and apply that to the biggest problems in the world, that becomes really interesting. And so that was our original mission statement. Use accelerating technologies to solve global problems. And so that has stayed very steady. We've added some programs, we've changed the curriculum, we've modified things, but in general, the massive purpose has been the same.
Since you started in Singularity and being part of the founding team, you have been doing other things, right? Like you have been, you created a couple of companies and you have doing some things. So tell us a little bit about that. Like what companies have you founded since then, and what are you doing right now?
So I started, as we started Singularity, I started a company called Angstro, which was a web service which was news about people that you know. Right? So if I have a board member and there's a news story about him, I'd better know from a relationship perspective. So it used your social network and would search for names, and then we used AI to filter whether the name was my particular name or somebody else, and then give you a Google News type of interface on news about people that you know. And we sold that to Google in 2010. And so my co-founder is there at Google.
Okay, and have you started another company, or are you thinking of starting a new company right now, or?
No. I wrote the book a couple of years ago. Writing a book almost killed me. Very difficult process. And so I'm kind of now evangelizing and talking about that a lot, and advising large companies a lot, and governments.
What about investing? Have you done some angel investing? Are you part of any venture capital firm?
I've done some angel investing. I'm on Angel List. I keep my investments very limited to companies that I can actively help, right? And so here and there, when we see a portfolio company that looks really interesting, I'll put a little money into it. My wife won't let me invest too much, though. So
a bit of control
keeps
there.
Me safe, yeah.
And what do you think? We are, of course, in Mexico growing the industry, and every year we have much more people investing as angel investors and people funding venture firms and everything. What do you think in this stage that angel investors should care about when hearing a project, or about when they're thinking about investing in a project? What do you think they will have to be looking at?
So I think two things. Today, when we look at investments, there's two criteria we look for. One is the entrepreneur trying to make a massive difference in the world? Are they trying to solve a really big problem? Right? And does that problem really exist? And so often people have a great technology and they're trying to fit it into a problem. When you're investing, it's much better to find somebody that is really passionate about a problem, because they will then find the technologies that will help with that problem. Right? You look at the founders of Waze, they were passionate about solving the traffic problem. Waze, by the way, seems to be legally mandated to use in Mexico City, right? You have to use it to get around.
So popular.
It has to. It's here in Sao Paulo and crowded cities, very important. But they were passionate about solving a particular problem. So that's one criteria. The second is every startup never ends up where it originally aimed. Right? Every startup goes through 3 or 4 orthogonal turns before you find your kind of niche. And can you trust that entrepreneur or the team to make those right-hand angles and get to the point, get to the final point? You look at how Airbnb started. It took like almost 2 years for them to get going. Right? Then it took off. Right? And so you have to have the patience and the gumption and the perseverance, the grit to keep pushing forward when the world tells you no. A great example of this is, many people don't know this, but when Larry and Sergey were looking for funding for Google, how many investor pitches do you think they did before they got funded? Does anybody know? 350. So 349 times they asked for money and they were told no. What if they'd stopped at 340, right? And how many other entrepreneurs stopped too early? And so a really fundamental belief in an idea and just never saying stop are 2 key criteria for success.
Okay, one final subject that I want to talk with you, and then we'll move on to your conference. We have been doing, in these new ecosystems, entrepreneurial ecosystems, we have been looking to different roles, right? Like the government role, and then we have the university's role and the entrepreneur's role. And we have a lot of great minds thinking about this, like Brad Fales and people like that. What do you think the university, and that's why I want to know your opinion because of Singularity, what do you think the university role is in a developing entrepreneurial ecosystem?
I think universities play a really critical role in this. You look at how successful the Tec de Monterrey has been, amazing programs around this. I think there's 2 key pieces. One is to teach courses on it, but secondly, give entrepreneurs a place to practice. Okay? One of the big problems that we have in society today is entrepreneurs don't have a place to practice. Right? And a particular problem in Mexico and in many countries around the world is failure is not tolerated. Silicon Valley is successful because failure is called experience, right? And I use the example of a child sitting down at a piano. Well, the first time a child plays a piano, they sound terrible. And we don't say, don't ever play another piano. We say, keep practicing until you get better. Yet when somebody builds a business and they fail, we say, don't ever build a business again. And that's the wrong attitude. We should say, keep trying, learn the second time. I've done 8 startups, 5 were miserable failures, right? And in many parts of the world, I would be considered a failure. In Silicon Valley, I'm like, this is great. So this is really a key part of it. I have a friend in Silicon Valley who had 7 successive failed startups, and number 8 is a $1 billion company. Okay? And I asked the investors, when he was on his 5th or 6th company, I asked the investors, he's failed 5 times in a row. Why are you giving him money on the 6th try? And they said, he will never stop. We know he's never going to stop. Right? And when you know somebody will never stop until they succeed, it's really easy to back them, be part of it. And maybe the biggest weakness I think that exists in the Mexico ecosystem is self-belief and self-confidence. Right? You have extraordinary talent. You have passion. Canadians don't have a lot of passion, right? Not a lot of great entrepreneurs coming out of Canada, but the self-confidence is missing. And so if there's one thing if I could give an injection, it would be self-confidence to Mexican entrepreneurs. And I think the university ecosystem can play a part in helping deliver that.
I think, maybe it's a bit different because Singularity is more focused, if I'm not wrong, to programs and more specific things, but I think one thing that Singularity is doing very good is just aiming to create companies and startups where but based on teams and based on similar interests. But you're very proactive on finding people that are alike and that they want to partner. I don't see that a lot of universities are doing so. What do you think would be a good step towards that? Like, what they could do to try to be more proactive and enhancing entrepreneurs to become co-founders and then helping launch their project and being much more proactive in helping, not in controlling, but in helping.
So there was an old truth or perception that an entrepreneur was born. We're finding more and more that entrepreneurs are made. It's a skill. You learn that skill over time, and you learn it by doing it again and again. And so universities can actually help run team building programs, right? Founding matching programs. And you see MIT, Stanford, et cetera, doing these kinds of programs to help founders and teams find each other and give them a place to operate, let them try on something, and then see how it goes. Tina Seelig at Stanford does an amazing job of teaching creativity and how to think outside the box. Right? She will do something like give the whole class a paper clip and say, go make money off that. And they have to wander around the campus finding how to make money out of a paper clip. And the winning team is whoever makes the most money from a paper clip by coming back at the end of the day. And so you can do some really fascinating things and set up very structured programs to teach entrepreneurship in a structured way and create a sandbox where entrepreneurs can play and try things out.
Okay.
Oh, there's one final piece. Let the intellectual property go. Many universities try and own the intellectual property coming out of the research departments, and almost all tech transfer programs have been a miserable failure. So that's and from a government perspective, make it easy for entrepreneurs to fail. In Spain or Italy, if you fail as an entrepreneur, you get criminal charges laid against you. Then they ask what happened, right? Nobody's ever going to be a two-time entrepreneur. It's too painful.
My final question would be, Salim, what do you think, like, it depends on the country and everything, but we have been seeing a lot of countries having amazing efforts in terms of the government, in terms of the universities, but in some cases we are also looking at these institutions trying to be like the center of the entrepreneurship instead of enhancing entrepreneurs to become like this big center and then help around them. Like, what's your intake on that? Should universities are more important than the entrepreneurs, so they should be in the middle, the entrepreneurs should be at the middle? Who do you think it's like the main role in the entrepreneurship, and what role do you think universities and government should play around them?
So having watched, I've spent time in the New York entrepreneurship ecosystem in Waterloo up in Canada in Silicon Valley. I'm pretty clear that an entrepreneurship ecosystem only works when the entrepreneurs are running it. Brad Feld has the same insight. If the governments are too centralized, for example, Russia has an entrepreneurship ecosystem, but the government runs the whole thing. No entrepreneurs, no successes coming out of it, right? The entrepreneurs have to self-convene and help each other, and then that gets started. Right? So for example, Brad Feld, whenever they have a company that fails in Boulder, Colorado, where he's based, they have a wake. They get together, they say goodbye to the company, they bury it, they drink, and then they move on. And so the entrepreneurship ecosystem is the entrepreneurs have to drive that ecosystem. The government and universities can play a supporting role and a support function and provide facilities, etc. But really the entrepreneurs and organizations like yourselves should drive that pattern.
Okay. Recently I found that you have come to Mexico quite a lot. So what do you think it has changed in the last couple of years in terms of entrepreneurship?
I think there's, one, I'm thrilled to see that there's a lot more entrepreneurs, right? And second, I think the Mexican entrepreneurs are starting to see the massive opportunities. Mexico as a country has an enormous opportunity to leapfrog the rest of the world. You have enough of a population. The US, for example, is stuck for about 20 years because of the political mess that it's in, right? Europe is going to be a complete mess for a while. And so countries like Mexico have an enormous opportunity to do something really interesting. It goes straight back to the self-belief and the self-confidence.
Salim, thank you very much. It has been an honor being here with you, and I will let you go to your conference. Thank you very much. Un fuerte aplauso para Salim, por favor.
Thank you very much. All right. So is there a table, or did I just start? Okay. Great. All right. I'm going to put these here. I'll try not to fall over the chairs. So I'm going to run through some of what we are seeing. How many of you have seen a presentation on Singularity University? Can I just see your show of hands? Okay, a few of you. Okay, got it. All right. You've heard a little bit about my background. That's my White House uniform. This is a little bit more the Silicon Valley outfit here. I'll skip straight through some of what we are seeing. Let me spend a few minutes on what we do at Singularity, and then I'll talk through some of what we are seeing out in the world. We are based at NASA. There are 10 NASA centers around the country, and we're in Silicon Valley is where they do all of the R&D and supercomputing for all of NASA. And so we're hosted there. We got initial funding from Google, Cisco, Nokia to get started. And we live off this particular curve, which many of you are familiar with as Moore's Law. The idea that we double computational speeds every 18 months. Ray Kurzweil put this chart together, and he found that even if you go all the way back to 1900, that we've been steadily doubling computational power for over 100 years. Right? And the question that he asked when he saw this data is, why is that curve so smooth and so predictable? We've had wars, recessions, ups and downs in the semiconductor industry. You should expect much more of a jagged stock market shape to this, not this very rhythmic progression that we see here. And so he spent about 10 years researching this to understand why this was the case. And he came up with a really fundamental observation, which is once you take a domain or a discipline or an industry area or a technology and you power it with information technology, and it acquires information properties, its price performance starts doubling very steadily. Right? Most importantly, once that doubling pattern starts, it does not stop, it just keeps going. And that has some extraordinary upper consequences. That's a logarithmic y-axis on the left. So the endpoint on that chart is actually 18 million times higher than the starting point. So in reality, it's almost a vertical chart. Peter just wrote this book, Abundance. Bill Clinton just called it one of the 2 most important books that he's read. Peter projects that if we could harness all of this acceleration effectively, we could soon have an abundance of healthcare, education, clean water, energy in about a decade. Right? And what would the world look like if that was the case? The doubling pattern that we have seen in Moore's Law, we are now seeing in all of these technologies. Artificial intelligence, robotics, drones, nanotech, 3D printing, biotech, neuroscience, even energy is doubling today in its price performance, anywhere from 18 to 30 months. As I mentioned earlier, we have never seen so many technologies moving so fast. And so this is the most exciting time to think about technology that we have ever seen. We have brought together the leading experts in the world across all of these areas, and we think about where does this go. We spend about 80% of our curriculum in our programs teaching the future. Right? Most academics thinks about the past. Right? How did this model evolve? How did this equation develop? We spend most of our time thinking about where does this go. When we get to the $100 genome, what applications become possible? Right? That's our mission statement, which is to kind of find leaders who can harness this pace of change and solve the biggest problems in the world. So there are 2 very unique things happening. First, we have like 10 technologies moving very fast. And secondly, for the first time in human history, we can apply advanced technology to cutting-edge global problems. We've never been able to do that before, but today that is possible. Right? We challenge our students to come up with ideas that would impact... Sorry, that was my lunch. I apologize for that. We challenge our students to come up with ideas in one of these global problem spaces, and the challenge we give them is come up with an idea that would impact 1 billion people within 10 years. Okay? Every summer we have 80 students that come from 40 countries. They live with us at NASA. For about half the summer, we deliver 300 hours of lectures, labs, workshops on the future of these technologies. The second half of the summer, we turn into an incubator and we give them this challenge, right? Harness this pace of change. And at the end of the summer, we launch NGOs, for-profit companies, research ideas, each trying to impact this number of people. This team was looking at poverty. They noticed that in Africa, 85% of all the roads disappear during the wet season. And how do you alleviate poverty if you can't move anything around? Chris Anderson, the head of Wired magazine, came and did a talk on drones. We're very familiar now with these quadcopter things. And they had the idea, why not use drones to move medicine and food around, especially where there aren't any roads. There's a live test from Haiti where they're delivering medicine to a camp. What's interesting about these drones is today you can carry a 4-kilo package about 10 kilometers. That is the range and capacity of these. But the underlying technologies are moving so fast, they are doubling in their capability every 9 months. Okay? So today they can carry 4 kilos, by middle of next year 8 kilos, by early the year after 16 kilos, then 32 kilos, and that doubling will just keep going. And so we're teaching our students to spot these doubling patterns, layer solutions on top of them. The solutions will then scale with the underlying technologies. This project inspired Amazon to making this announcement. You may have heard that Amazon wants to deliver packages using drones. This was inspired by our project. By the way, when they made this announcement, they had no such capability. But they managed to get this story onto 60 Minutes, which is a major American TV show, the day before Cyber Monday, which is their biggest shopping day of the year. So their marketing people were very happy. They've since put considerable investment into it. Okay? Here's the latest news from this team. They are now delivering mail for the Swiss Postal Service. Okay? Really interesting if you can deliver mail using drones. Okay? So that's one example of one of our projects. Another couple of our alumni are taking seedlings, tree seedlings, putting a nutritionist gel around it and shooting them down from drones. They want to plant 1 billion trees a year to solve the carbon problem. Right? Incredible and fantastic idea. This team launched a 3D printer up to the International Space Station last year. Ironically, up at the space station, it turns out there's no space. It's full of extra spare parts, because if a valve goes bad, you'd better have a replacement. And so about 4 months ago, we actually fabricated and manufactured and created the first ever man-made objects not made on the surface of the Earth. Right? So interesting things going on there. So that's some of what we are looking at in terms of projects. We do shorter programs as well, and I want to give you this one statistic. We bring together for 4 days in this program called the IPP, CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, right? You can see some of the logos there. So for 4 days, we have CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. We give them 2 days of briefings on these technologies, and for 2 days, we give them ideas for how to organize around it, partly coming from the ideas in the book. We ask them beforehand, how aware are you of some of these breakthroughs? And you can see 75% had very little awareness of some of these technologies. At the end of the 4 days, we said to them, how big of an impact will this have on your industries? And we gave them a timeline of 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 years, and a severity scale of low, medium, high, game-changing impact. And the statistic at the top absolutely surprised us. 80% of them agreed that these technologies would have a game-changing impact on their industries within 2 years. Okay? 100% within 5 years. And so this is essentially the gap that we're trying to bridge. Most people have very little awareness of what's coming. When they do, there's this oh heck moment, and I'm using the Canadian term there, as to what to do about it. So let me run through what we're seeing happen out in the world. We're seeing kind of 4 major things going on today as a result of all of these technologies. The first is we're digitizing the world, right? Many of you are listening through me through digital communications. All of our relationships are now digital because of social networks. Our memories are not in our heads anymore, they're in our smartphones. Essentially, we're turning ourselves into digital creatures, right? Many of you spend all your day texting and not speaking, right? And so essentially and we're rapidly augmenting the human experience using this digital phenomena. And as we miniaturize all of this computation, we're putting it in everywhere. 10 years ago, we had maybe 500 million internet-connected devices. Today we're up to about 12 billion internet-connected devices, right? So 10 years ago, 500 million, today 12 billion. We'll be at 50 billion by the end of the decade, and shortly after that, we are going to get to 1 trillion. So think about that one statistic. We're going from 12 billion today to 1 trillion internet-connected devices in the next 10 years or so. We think we're 30, 40 years into the information revolution. On this statistic, we've just crossed 1%. We're literally just starting. Most of this disruption is actually ahead of us. And now we're starting to put everything into a digital environment. This is a team out of Israel. They can take a 10-second clip of your voice, and just by analyzing the tonal variation, can assess your mood and your underlying attitude to about 85% accuracy. Okay? So customer service teams are using this today. If an angry customer calls, what's the underlying attitude? Can you recover the customer, or should you just hang up the phone, move on to the next one? Right? How do we think about that? Okay? And so you can actually download this app called Moody's if you want to try this out. Try this out on your spouse if you want to have an interesting discussion about their mood. I found their mood goes off very dramatically when you do that. I was speaking at a conference 2 months ago, and one of our alumni actually taped 13 seconds of me on stage and said that was my mood and my underlying attitude as I was speaking on stage. Right? Of course, completely wrong about stubborn. I'm absolutely not stubborn at all. And you can see where this goes, right? In the next presidential debates, we'll have the presidential debates arguing, and underneath there'll be a ticker saying, here's what they're really thinking. Okay? In fact, I'll predict that with technologies like this and cameras recording facial twitches, in about 4 or 5 years, it's going to be impossible to lie. Okay? So if you're in marketing, you have to be a bit careful. Our politicians will have to totally change the way they look at the world. And we will never have seen that before, right? Our entire world, we would never have seen that before. How will we adjust to this capability? And so I predict 4 or 5 years for that, right? Now we have found when you turn something digital, it becomes very, very disruptive. And the best analogy we have for that is photography. Now many of you don't remember film photography, you're too young, but you're operating on a material substrate, and you're operating from a scarcity model, right? You can only carry so much film around. It costs about $1 per photograph. It takes a few days to get your prints back. When you go to digital photography and you go to an information-based substrate and environment, 2 or 3 really important things happen. The first is that the marginal cost goes to 0. Okay? Now you can take 1,000 more photographs, the cost is the same. As a result, the domain absolutely explodes. So your parents, when they used film cameras, they carefully clicked every shot. And today, you just hold the shutter button down, right? And so now we take billions of photographs as a result, okay? The third thing that happens is really subtle but very important, is that you shift the problem space. So when I have a scarcity problem space, I take courses in photography so I can learn about composition, I learn about the rule of thirds, I very carefully kind of optimize for every shot. In a digital problem space, in an abundant problem space, we all have 8 copies of our photographs on 10 different devices, and you can't find anything because it's buried in everything else, right? And so we shift the problem space. When we move from a material basis to a digital basis, you shift the problem space from a scarcity problem to an abundance problem, okay? And note that when you shift the problem space, you change the business models. What you're selling changes, and that's why we're seeing such disruption in this digital world, because the business model changes. And older companies have a tough time migrating to this new business model, okay? We are now seeing that, this acceleration happen across all of these technologies. This transition from the material world to the digital world is happening in all of these technologies, AI, robotics, 3D printing, etc. Let me show you an example. How many of you have seen this robot called Baxter?
Or
Can I just see your show of hands? How many of you?
So the people working with
Can I drop the
Baxter
volume
get a
on this?
promotion
Thank
from
you.
working on repetitive,
So
mundane
Baxter is a
tasks
stock
to
picking robot.
supervising robots
okay?
that do them.
You literally move his arms to show it what to do, and it then does the job from then on. Okay? Okay? There's a huge inflection point that has been hit here in robotics. In robotics, we always had to prescriptively program the robot. You had to say, pick up something, turn 90 degrees, move over here, turn back, put it down. If you change your assembly line, it took months to reprogram the robot. With Baxter, you literally move its arms, takes about 25 minutes to train, does not require any programming. Okay? Costs $22,000. Does not unionize, does not get sick, does not take coffee breaks, right? Mostly. Okay? This guy is smiling. He's about to lose his job, basically, is essentially where we're going, right? And so extraordinary what you can do with this. And to give you a sense of how fast this is moving, the really expensive part of Baxter is the red $10,000 arm that moves in 17 degrees of freedom, has a lot of actuators built into it. So that's the most expensive part, is the red arm. This is one of our faculty doing something similar with a rubber arm. He's using pneumatics and compressed air to drive this arm. This can do 95% of the functionality of that $10,000 arm, except this costs $35. And what we see across all of these domains is when you see a step change in innovation, we see orders of magnitude coming off the price. Let me show you two other technologies that are moving very, very fast. In biotech and bioinformatics, 50 years ago, we discovered the human genome. We found that life is information-based. You take A, T, C, and G, the 4 molecules of DNA, and you assemble those in interesting ways. You get all of the diversity that we have in biology. And when you learn a new language, you learn how to read, then we do comprehension, then we learn how to write. Okay? We've learned how to read DNA incredibly well. You can see it kind of roughly following Moore's law, and then it literally falls off a cliff. This is moving at 5 times the pace of Moore's law today, doubling every 4 months in its price performance. This may be the fastest moving technology we have ever seen in the world. In 2001, it cost almost $3 billion to fully sequence a human genome. Okay? $3 billion, 2001. The second one cost maybe 400 million. Third one is about 50 million. Does anybody know what it is today? It's $1,000. We've gone from almost $3 billion down to $1,000 today. By the end of the decade, it'll be about a penny. By 2020, it will be cheaper to sequence your genome than it will be to flush your toilet. Okay? And when you flush your toilet, we'll sequence everything that goes through there. It'll be an interesting thing to do, to see what viruses, bacteria, et cetera, you have inside you, right? And so now we're starting to learn how to comprehend this, and now we're starting to learn how to write. And when you start writing DNA, you start really fundamentally changing life. This is a contest of college students that get together to hack DNA in interesting ways. This is the winning team from 3 years ago. They took the DNA from jellyfish that glows in the dark, crossed it with a cat. You can buy this pet that glows in the dark. Okay? Cat's not very happy about it. It can't hide anymore. Very crazy where this goes, right? And what's extraordinary is you can do this today in your bedroom. Okay? Try this out on your little brother or little sister if you want to have an interesting discussion with your parents around this. Here's one of our companies trying to take advantage of this. They are growing hamburger and a steak in a petri dish as opposed to cutting it out of a cow. Okay? And so they can grow a hamburger in a dish. It tastes terrible today. We've tasted it. Our joke is the taste is doubling every year. We'll see how that actually works out. So very extraordinary. Here's another company. This is called the Arctic apple. When you bite into an apple, it turns brown, right? It oxidizes and turns brown. They've found the one gene in the apple that does this and turned it off. So you can bite into that apple, leave it for 4 days on the table, it does not turn brown. Right? So really interesting things we're starting to do with this. What's the recent developments in biotech, we found that there's an extraordinary explosion in understanding of what's called the microbiome. You have 10 trillion cells in the human body, but you have 100 trillion bacteria inside your stomach. And more, half of the dopamine in your brain comes from your gut bacteria. Right? So you want to keep your stomach happy, basically. And we're finding more and more medical conditions are related to the health of this different population of bacteria inside your stomach. A year ago, somebody hypothesized maybe by changing the ratio of bacteria, you could address diabetes. And about 2 months ago, they found by switching the gut bacteria, you can actually cure diabetes. Okay, pretty incredible. And so more and more we're finding, and now we can do machine learning and data analysis on the different bacteria that you have. If you want to try this out, you can take probiotics. If you take probiotics, you're essentially changing the ratio of bacteria. A more advanced technique is called fecal transplants, and I'm just going to move right along because that's a little crazy to talk about here. Okay, maybe the most unbelievable technology that we've ever discovered as a human species is this, called CRISPR. It turns out we can now edit the human genome as easily as you can cut and paste in a Word document. Okay? Let me repeat that. We can now edit the human genome and modify it as easily as you can manipulate a text document. And this completely changes the world because now we can edit a human being live. And so this will change everything. The Chinese just announced that they're modifying embryos in the womb, and now Pandora's box is completely open. Okay? And so this gives a whole new term to hacking, in a sense, as to where we go. All the bioethics people are totally freaked out. So this is what's happening in biotech. Let me touch on one last technology, which is neuroscience. In neuroscience, the real acceleration is the idea that the resolution at which we can image the brain is doubling every year. Right? So incredible possibilities coming. And what happens when you take all of these very fast-moving technologies and interface it with this old organ that we simply don't know how to use? We still don't know why we sleep, for example. We have very little idea. Today you can get $100 headsets that give you a pretty good readout as to what brainwave frequencies are going on in your brain. Okay? Here's a team out of Japan called Dreamcatcher. You go to sleep in an MRI machine, you can see the photograph there. While you're sleeping, they're storing the images coming off your visual cortex. Their objective is to play your dreams back to you the next day. Okay? My wife wants to get her hands on that. I'm kind of less interested in that. And you can see the delicacy where this goes with society also, right? And so extraordinary possibilities there. Now that's the reading side of it. Now we're starting to write to the brain. About 5 years ago, we discovered that you could create light-sensitive neurons, use a virus to distribute the neurons in the brain of a mouse, and you put light into the mouse, and you can make the mouse angry, hungry, tired, sad, turn left, turn right, and essentially we have mind control, okay, using light. Now, it turns out this is now out of date, because the light is a pain in the ass to have to put in an optical fiber into the head. The recent thing is that they've now found we can actually deliver sound. You can create neurons that are sound sensitive, deploy them in the brain, and just by using different sound frequencies, you can modify the brain. So now we're going to start to hack the brain. Okay, so really interesting things are going to start to happen now. So this is what's happening in all of these technologies. I don't have time to go into detail in all of them, but all of them are going through this explosion. Let me lift up for a level to show you some of the high-level implications. How many of you are familiar with the Tricorder X Prize? Can I just see a show of hands? Anybody here? Okay, a few of you. So Peter has a $10 million prize for literally the Star Trek tricorder. Okay? Somebody will win $10 million when their handheld device can beat 10 doctors in doing a diagnosis. So when your handheld device can outperform 10 doctors in doing a medical diagnosis, you win $10 million. 300 teams have been competing for this. We are down to the final 7. The winner will be announced in the next 6 months. Okay, so within 6 months, we will have a handheld device that can beat most doctors in doing a diagnosis. That will fundamentally change healthcare. Especially in the rural areas where it's hard to get to a doctor, hugely transformative, or in emerging markets where we have, developing countries where you have a doctor per million citizens, totally transformative. Okay? If you're thinking about getting a medical degree, don't, okay? Because this will be outperforming you very quickly. Oh, by the way, if you're a hypochondriac, you will love this gadget, right? In fact, you'll buy 2 of them because one of them must be wrong, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? But maybe the most unbelievable thing that we're seeing today is actually solar energy. It turns out that solar energy is doubling every 22 to 30 months in its price performance, and has been for a few decades now. You can see from the 70s and 80s. So every 2 years, solar energy is doubling in its price performance. At this pace, we will hit 100% of world energy supply deliverable by solar in about 23 years. Okay? 23 years we'll hit 100% of world energy supply deliverable by solar, which will have huge geopolitical consequences, right? Here's next year, solar becomes cheaper than the energy coming off the US grid. And we'll see a huge investment change in that ecosystem. And of course, this will have the Middle East will essentially collapse as a result, right? The US will have to find other reasons to go to war, as an example. Russia will be in big trouble. Russia's only asset is oil and gas. Mexico will have a big problem because you rely heavily on oil, right? Saudi Arabia today is selling off its oil as fast as it can because they do not want to be left with oil in the ground. So oil prices are going to stay very low for the foreseeable future. And so huge impact. Ecuador as a country is in a mess because of this. Canada also in a mess because of this. So we're going to see a huge change in the world because of technology. And something that technology does consistently, technology takes something that's scarce and it makes it abundant. And so here we have energy that used to be scarce, energy will now become abundant. Here's the cost of solar, and look at the last 5 years, the way it's dropped off a cliff, now equivalent to the cost of coal and natural gas, okay? So huge changes. Now, this disruption, the technologies are going very well. As I mentioned, we have never seen so many technologies moving so fast. Each of them is doubling every 1 to 2 years in their price performance, and each of them is accelerating, but where they intersect, that adds another multiplier to it. And so we've never seen this. In the 1500s, we had the Gutenberg moment, and the printing press changed everything. Today, it's like we have 20 Gutenberg moments happening at the same time, right? And so very exciting changes in technology. But fundamentally, we are not set up for this. Every mechanism by which we run society, our civics, our politics, our legal systems, healthcare, education, intellectual property, all designed for a world a few hundred years ago, not for today. We're actually going to need to re-architect every single way in which we run the world. And our existing structures, political structures, societal structures are not set up for this. And so we'll need to re-architect all of that. This is why entrepreneurs are so important, to take and break through our current way of thinking and to deliver a completely new way. Let me show you the reaction of the world when you hit new technology. You're all familiar with the Google car? Yes? Show of hands? Okay. Here's what it's like to ride the Google car. Could I get some volume for this, please? So let me show you a video of what it's like to ride the Google car.
Behance team will never believe this.
Oh my goodness. Go is the right word. Holy shit. Holy shit. There's no fucking hands on that wheel. Oh my god. What?
It's driving itself.
You get the general idea. That scream, okay, that is the primal scream of humanity meeting advanced technology, right? And when you first get into that car and it takes off at high speed, you freak out. And what's happening here is at the back of our brains, we have an old organ called an amygdala, which is constantly scanning for bad news, okay? If you heard a noise in the bushes, you ran because bad news could kill you a few thousand years ago. Today, bad news doesn't kill you. But because of this evolutionary mechanism, we are 10 times more likely to listen to bad news than we are to listen to good news. The world is actually in a better place than we have ever had it in the history of the world. We have less deaths by war. Extreme poverty has dropped 80% in the last few decades. But you would not know that if you watch the news, right? Especially Fox News. If you watch Fox News, you're pretty much, if you watch Fox News, you're going to die this week. If you're really lucky, you'll last till next week, but then you're going to die next week, right? And if you watch the news cycles, they're tickling your amygdala on a constant basis. And we now need to figure out how to shift away from that. And what's happening today is we're seeing the world's amygdala freak out. So here's the Prime Minister of Turkey from last year. A smart, thoughtful, intelligent guy making a totally ridiculous comment. This is him freaking out. This is the US amygdala freaking out, trying to use old structures to address new problems, right? And so we need to figure out how to solve for these structural issues, because here's how we've tried to protect society against bad people. Unfortunately, this is not compatible with that. And we have a huge problem today with drones dropping cell phones, drugs, money, cameras behind prison walls. The wardens are going nuts in terms of how to deal with this, right? And so huge issue. Now, from an economic perspective, the real driver here is when you digitize something, a couple of things happen. The metabolism of the economy accelerates. It used to take 20 years to create a billion-dollar marketplace. We're now seeing that happen in months, right? And the volatility is increasing. Many of you have seen this statistic. The average lifespan of a Fortune 500 or S&P 500 company used to be almost 70 years. The quote there is out of date. It's now down to 12 years. And so every 12 years, the lifespan changes, okay? And what we see when we fully digitize an industry from one end to the other, you see this graph on the left, this deflationary cliff where revenues go up and then all of a sudden they drop off a cliff, as in this case, Craigslist, eBay, and so on hit. This is the music business, same thing, kind of trundle along, and then 10x drop in revenues as we digitized it. Note that it's called a media industry. They're trying to sell the physical media. But actually, it's an information service. When you go from artist to listener with a YouTube video, all the intermediaries disappear, right? So huge collapse in the music business. Now here's the fundamental problem that we have. All of our education, all of our training, all of our intuition about the world teaches us to predict linearly. We're very good at linear extrapolation, okay? But the world, driven by information, is now riding this exponential curve, not the linear curve. So let me give you an example. If I take 30 steps like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I take 30 steps, I'll go 30 meters, I'll get to the back of the room, and you can all predict really well where I would be 1/3 of the way or 2/3 of the way in that progression. We're extremely good at that linear extrapolation. But if I take 30 doubling steps, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, I do that 30 times. At step 30, I've gone 1 billion meters. I'm 26 times around the world, which is a bit further than the back of the room, right? And it's hard to estimate where am I 1/3 of the way or 2/3 of the way in that projection. More and more of the world is riding now that green exponential curve, and we are not good at spotting this pace of change. Let me give you an example. How many of you had heard of 3D printing 5 years ago? Can I just see a show of hands? Okay, 10 years ago, anybody? 15 years ago? Okay, 3D printing is actually 35 years old. It is not a new technology. But when it first came out in the 1980s, the price performance was terrible. You could print out 0.001 widgets an hour. 2 years later, it doubled to 0.002 widgets an hour. 2 years later, it doubled to 0.004. 2 years later, 0.008, and then 0.016 widgets an hour. It takes a long time to get to 1, right? And it looks linear, so everybody ignores it. Then it hits 1, 2, 4, 8, because the doubling continues. And then everybody goes crazy, and that's what the acceleration takes place. So in many industries, if they do not spot the doubling pattern, it will disrupt them very badly. If you spot the doubling pattern, it's the biggest advantage you could possibly have. And maybe the heart of what we're trying to teach is spot those doubling patterns, because most other people will not spot it. Let me give you a couple of examples. This is Vinod Khosla. We saw exponential growth in mobile phones throughout the decade of the 2000s. We started with 100 million mobile phones in 2000, doubled in 2 years, doubled 2 years after that, doubled 2 years after that. Vinod went back throughout the decade and he asked the question, how well did the industry mobile expert analysts predict that pace of change? Okay, so in 2002 he looked at McKinsey's, Jupiter's, all of the forecasts from Gartner, et cetera, and they predicted 16% growth. Okay? Went up 100%, not 16%, so they were off by quite a bit. Yet their next prediction was 14%. Then it went up another 100%, their next prediction was 12%. And what you can see here is when you have exponential growth, the experts in that field will all predict linearly, because they're operating off old models. Okay? In 2008, Unable to see 3 doubling patterns of 100% growth each, they predicted 10% growth. Then it went up another 100%. How much more wrong can you be from 10% to 100%? You're 10 times off. This is not a math error, this is a cognitive error. And so the experts in many fields will operate on a linear basis even when the world is operating on an exponential basis. I'll give you another example. When the Google car first came out 6 years ago, the cost of the GPS sensors, LiDAR, radar added up to about $300,000 per car. All the car companies looked at that and said, bah, cute research project, but you'll never commercialize it. It's too expensive. 2 years later, it had dropped to $75,000 a car. Right? It's quite a lot better, but still too expensive. And today it's $1,000 a car. And now everybody's freaking out. Right? And so there's another, and I'll give you one last example. I showed you this graph of solar energy showing how solar energy has dropped. The world's leading expert in solar in 2003 said, look, if you add up all of the components, you will never drop below $1 a watt. It just takes all of that equipment. It continued to drop, kept dropping, and last year it was 50 cents a watt. Today it's about 18 cents a watt. And at the bottom you can see his latest prediction. It said getting below $1 has exceeded my expectations. Right? And we are fond of saying an expert in a field is somebody who will tell you how something cannot be done. And so beware the expert. Okay? The minute an expert tells you something, go the other way. So be careful about that. Okay. Now we're information enabling everything. If you have an extra bedroom, Airbnb can use the payment systems, reputation systems, messaging, GPS, location, and can turn your extra bedroom into a hotel room. Peter Thiel invested in Airbnb at a valuation of 40% of Hyatt hotels worldwide 3 years ago. People said, you're crazy. That's a ridiculous valuation to give a startup. He'd spotted the exponential curve in the room nights. Here's how their room nights have continued. They recently had 500,000 rooms occupied in one night around the world. Okay? At this pace, Airbnb will be the biggest hotel chain in the world by January. In 4 months, Airbnb will be the biggest hotel chain in the world. And they don't own any hotels. This is a great business. Right? You're the market leader, you have none of the costs. Very awesome. Now we're seeing anywhere we have episodic use of an asset, we're going to see it turn from a product to a service. This will fundamentally disrupt many, many industries as we deal with this. And the real driver behind all of this is the last one, which is the democratization. As the cost of all of these technologies drops to zero, it means that anybody can access them. Today, we have an explosion of entrepreneurs that come into an industry with a beginner's mind and leveraging these new technologies, and they're making dramatic changes. Elon Musk may be the best example of this. Elon has no experience in the car sector, energy sector, space sector, and yet he's created market leaders in each of those industries, having no expertise in those industries, right? And it's unbelievable what you can do today. And what happens in all of these areas is this is the pattern. A domain becomes digital, the costs go to zero, you see open source communities forming, technologies intersect, and then you radically disrupt the status quo. We are about to see the biggest disruption in business in the history of humanity in the next 10, 15, 20 years. That's why it's such a good time to be an entrepreneur. Okay? This is how many of you are familiar with the Hyperloop? Okay? So Elon is designing a transportation system to take you 4,000 kilometers an hour to go from LA to San Francisco in 20 minutes. And he's using repurposed oil pipelines, and you shoot people down it in pods at 4,000 kilometers an hour. Okay? Now, it used to be that only a big government or a corporate lab could do this type of innovation. Today, that is not true. Anybody with a great idea, but you have to be crazy, right? You have to be crazy to think up something like this. That's why I say go be crazy. And you're Mexican, so you're half crazy anyway, so it doesn't matter, right? I'll give you another example. This is Emiliano Cargiman. He's from Argentina. He's been voted by our faculty the most likely to actually impact 1 billion people. And what he's doing, he's launching nanosatellites. They're about the size of a shoebox. They're about this big. Once he has a mesh cluster of them up in space, he will be able to provide real-time video anywhere in the world to a 1 meter resolution. And he's going to open an app store. So if you want to write an application like parking spots in Mexico City, you write the application, you share the revenues with him. Okay? He's 25 years old, had no experience in the space sector before he did this. Okay? We will never lose another Malaysian airliner again. Okay? For privacy, people will be walking around with umbrellas in order to stay private from this thing. So very crazy what's happening. His first 3 satellites have already launched. Okay? I mentioned these $100 headsets that give you a pretty good fidelity readout. I don't know if you can see that this is me on the left wearing one of these headsets. On the right is one of our alumni. His name is Will Henschel. He was a guitarist for the Eurythmics, the band from the 1980s. What Will is doing, he is composing music that when you play the music, it puts your brain in the zone. So if you want to write software or work on a spreadsheet or work on emails, you essentially plug into this Pandora type station and your brain goes into the zone. Look at my brain before and after he plays the music. You can see my brain is flooded with alpha waves, which indicates I'm in a deep focused state. Okay? Now if you're Red Bull, you need to be really worried about this. Right? Or if you're a coffee company, because you think your competition comes from other coffee companies, it doesn't. It comes from people like this. Because if people start using this, you'll drink less coffee. I wrote my whole book listening to this music. By the way, they have found that this is better for all of the children with ADD and ADHD. This is better than any of the drugs that they're giving the kids today. Right? And half of you have ADD anyway, so go listen to the music. Okay. Maybe the most incredible thing we're seeing today is Bitcoin. Bitcoin, I think, is the most disruptive technology I've ever seen. We recently had $300 million moved around the world at a cost of $6. Okay? And the real value in Bitcoin is not really just the currency, but the fact that you can do microtransactions. Today, it is not worth doing a monetary transaction for less than about $1 because the credit card transaction costs are too high. But I could actually, with Bitcoin, borrow your Wi-Fi on your phone for 2.5 minutes and pay you 0.06 cents. And so we're going to see a new level of granular business models operating at a very small level. But the real valuable part of Bitcoin is called the blockchain. How many of you are familiar with the blockchain? Please go read about this. This is the most disruptive technology I've ever seen. And the thing, what the blockchain allows you to do is decentralize authentication. Okay? We have many systems in the world, like voting systems, payment systems, that are centralized third-party authentication. When you deposit money, they say, yeah, this money was deposited. When you make a vote, they say, yeah, this person voted. There's a third-party authentication. Okay? With the blockchain, you decentralize the authentication. You don't need the third party. So a bank is a centralized authenticated ledger. If you can decentralize the ledger, you don't need the bank. So retail banking is done. Okay? And so we're going to see a whole host of industries get totally disrupted by the blockchain as a result. The Bitcoin I would put kind of about there. We're going to see new products and services emerge very soon as this happens. So where do we go with this? Because I've talked about, as we digitize the world, we've now digitized healthcare, energy becoming rapidly digital because of solar energy. Every business is starting to become fully digital. Sales and marketing are completely digital, right? Production, manufacturing, rapidly becoming digitized. And this is the quote that really struck me 3 years ago when we started writing the book. All of our organizations are built for predictability and for efficiency. All of our big organizations. And today, that is not the high order driver. And the thing what we're seeing is we're seeing a new breed of organization. We've learned how to scale technology pretty well. But now it's time to learn how to scale the actual organization, right? And if you're an entrepreneur, you know that building the organization is a pain in the ass. If you can scale the organization, really interesting. And we're seeing a new breed of organization that can scale 10 times faster than its peers in the same space. And so we call these exponential organizations. I'll give you an example. If you're a car company, it costs about $3 billion to design a new car model from scratch. Local Motors designs a completely new car model from scratch for $3 million. That's 1,000 times better than the existing car companies. Okay? We've now found about 100 companies operating at this 10 times better performance benchmark than their peers in the same space. I wrote an article in April called Secrets of Unicorns that came out in Silicon Valley, if you're interested in going to read that, and we talk about what it takes to build one of these. And let me run through for the entrepreneurs in the room, what are the 3 components of building one of these new organizations. The first is the big purpose. I mentioned that in the Q&A earlier. All of these new organizations have a very massive transformative purpose, like Google, organize the world's information, right? Or TED is ideas worth spreading. Singularity is go impact 1 billion people positively. You create this huge purpose, it's very transformative, a gravity well of interest, a community forms, and then you can do radical things. Many of you are familiar with DIY drones, right? How many of you are familiar with DIY drones? Okay, it's a community of 50,000 drones enthusiasts, and it's led by Jordi Munoz, a Mexican kid who's like 21 or something. Huge purpose in all of these organizations. We're actually seeing, by the way, brands are moving to this new model. If you look at the bottom, Coca-Cola, their new mantra is open happiness. That's their massive transformative purpose. Not sell sugar water through highly leveraged distribution chains to add value to our ecosystem of vendors, suppliers, because nobody would know what that was anyway. It's actually open happiness, right? Very interesting. Now, our old way of building a business for the last few thousand years has been to get an asset or a workforce, put a legal boundary around it, and sell access to scarcity. All of our businesses from the beginning of time are about selling scarcity, okay? What these new organizations are doing is they're selling abundance. Uber taps into an abundance of extra cars. Airbnb taps into an abundance of extra bedrooms, right? And they're keeping a very small footprint and using one of these externalities to scale outside the core organization. TED uses its community, Uber uses staff on demand, Airbnb leverages other people's assets. So if you're building a business, do not acquire your own assets, use somebody else's, right? Look at Waze. When you join Waze, it's piggybacking on your GPS to provide more traffic information, right? So you keep a small footprint, you scale outside. Note that for a company like Uber, the mission critical function of Uber is to match driver and passenger. It doesn't happen inside the organization. It happens out in the wild. And by enabling that with technology, you can scale infinitely. Okay, Google uses algorithms to scale. And so all of these are using one of these externalities. Then there's 5 internal mechanisms to act as the control framework of the organization. The lean startup methodology, real-time dashboards, autonomy. How many of you are familiar with Valve software? Anybody? Valve software? It's a gaming company out of Seattle, about 400 people. No CEO, no reporting lines, no job descriptions, no management meetings, no middle management of any kind, okay? It operates like a beehive. If I'm at Valve and I see a bug in the software, I find the 3 people that can help solve that bug, we go solve it, and we disband. Everybody chooses what they want to do. They get more revenue per employee than Microsoft by doing this. And it's enabled by the bottom one, which is social technologies. Today, by using Yammer, Chatter, Slack, we can do horizontal communications in a company, and we found that horizontal communication patterns are much better than any vertical communication patterns in a company, right? If you implement 4 out of the 10, you get the 10x performance improvement. Not everybody does all of them, right? But if you implement 4 out of the 10, you get the 10 times performance improvement across all of them. And you can actually take a survey. If you're building a company, go to this website and take a survey. It takes about 15, 20 minutes. And you'll score your own company on how scalable the organization is. Okay? It's free to take if you want to do that. This is from the end of the book. This is the market cap of the top most exponential organizations from the 2011, when I started writing the book, to the end of the book. In 10 quarters, you can see the multiplier in all of their market cap just in less than 3 years. Okay? You can see how fast these companies are scaling. And here's the core economic reason why. When you're running a business, you're worried about managing cost of demand and cost of supply. And and you try and optimize on both sides of that equation. What the internet did for us for the first time ever allowed us to drop the cost of demand exponentially, right? Online marketing, referral marketing. If you get a viral loop, your acquisition costs go completely to zero. And for the first time in the history of business, we could acquire customers at no cost. Okay? That's the internet did that for us. What these new exponential organizations have figured out is how do you drop the cost of supply exponentially? If you're Airbnb, the marginal cost of adding a room to your inventory is almost zero. If you're Hyatt, you have to build a whole new hotel, right? Same with Waze. When you join Waze, your demand and your supply. Right? When you can drop your cost of supply, you take out the denominator, your market cap explodes. So as all of you think about building businesses, think about how do you build a business with no cost of supply. Okay? And if you can do that, then the existing businesses in that industry are toast because they cannot compete with this. They cannot compete with no cost of supply. All of them have huge legacy costs, right? This is why it's the best time in the history of the world to be an entrepreneur. You can build a business with zero cost of supply, and all of the existing businesses can't compete with you. And so this is why we're fascinated by this. Now, this doesn't hit all industries equally. If you have some industries like oil and gas, construction, mining, that are very physical, and the sheer physicality means that it's slower to be disrupted. But then you have industries that are where the product is physical, but the revenue streams are all digital. Your iPhone, if you have a Kindle, it's a physical product, but all the revenue streams are information-based. And then you have your fully information industries. But as I mentioned, every industry is turning into a digital industry, right? Healthcare will now become digital. Energy will become digital. The Tesla car is not really a car, it's a computer that happens to have wheels, right? And it's not even that, it's an app. It actually updates itself every week, okay? And so, huge change as we move everything towards the digital environment. Okay, because this pace of change is not slowing down. It's actually accelerating. If that was a really exponential curve, it would be linear, but actually the pace of change is itself accelerating. And I've talked about healthcare, energy, cars becoming digital. We had 1 billion people online in 2010. Okay? We're up to almost 3 billion people today. We're more than doubled it. By the end of the decade, we're going to have 6 billion people online. The biggest marketplace in the history of humanity is being created right now, these few years. We're going to have most of the human population online by 2020, and they're all going to have one of these. This is the latest DataWind Android tablet. This is a 1 gig Android tablet with Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, camera, and it's a phone. The cost of manufacturing this has now dropped to $10. Okay? And it's dropping in price 50% a year. Next year it'll be $5. The year after it'll be $2. By 2020, we will be giving these out in cereal boxes because you won't be able to sell anything to those 5 billion people if they don't have one of these, right? So we'll be giving these out for free. 6 billion people will have access to it, and they're all going to be online. How many of you are familiar with the Google Loon project? Show of hands, a few of you. So Google is launching high-altitude weather balloons to deliver free internet access, broadband, anywhere in the world. Free broadband anywhere in the world. Okay? Facebook has another project, 3 other satellite companies doing the same thing. When Google announced this 2 years ago, there were 2 buckets of people that said this will never work. The first were the balloon experts, right? I'll go back to the experts again. And the balloon experts said, look, a weather balloon goes up, it gets really cold, the material freezes, cracks appear, the weather balloon comes down. No weather balloon stays up for more than about 3 weeks. You're crazy to try this. We're balloon experts, it's what we do. The second group were the telco companies who said, look, you cannot deliver broadband from that high. The power requirements will be too high. The equipment will be too heavy. 2 years later, the balloons are staying up for more than 200 days at a time each, and they're delivering 40 megabits a second of broadband. Okay? And that's today. And that's doubling every year. So in the next few years, we'll have the whole world having broadband internet access pretty much for free, 6 billion people having these devices. This is the marketplace and the world that we're living into. And so all of these people start becoming digital and having access to the world's information, becoming fully information-based. Trillions of dollars coming into this new economy. So I mentioned healthcare, I mentioned energy. Now we get to food. How many of you are familiar with Soylent? See a show of hands? Okay. So Rob Reinhardt is a software developer out of New York City. And he gets annoyed that he has to stop writing software to go eat lunch. Typical developer kind of mentality, right? And when he goes to eat lunch, he eats bad food. A friend of his is lifting weights and drinking protein shakes to build muscle mass. And he says, why can't I drink a milkshake that is a whole meal? Then I don't have to go out to eat. And he finds that doesn't exist. So he spends 4 months with nutritionists and biochemists to come up with this stuff called Soylent. And this is 100% of the carbs, fats, nutrients, vitamins, minerals you need as a human being for one day. You can drink that and not take in anything else. People have now lived on this for 6 months without taking anything else in. They've lost a lot of weight, they're much healthier, they're a little bored, right? Because if you just drank that for 6 months, you'd go nuts, right? But note now, right, food becomes really interesting. And what he did, now if you were 40 years old or over, your first instinct, if you invented this, would be to put a patent on that recipe and license that out to people to make money. This younger generation is different. You're all familiar with Elon Musk open sourcing his battery technology. He open sourced his recipe. Anybody can go make it. Okay? And his reason was, look, I have a massive purpose. I want to solve hunger. If there's an earthquake in Nepal, I want people to drop boxes of this stuff in there. Right? The most interesting thing, he actually runs this like a software company. He's just had release 1.4. Food is now software. So he runs this like a software release. And it has some bugs in it, etc. Version 2.0 just came out, by the way. Okay? So food is now software. By the way, if you find version 1.3 on sale for cheap, it caused a lot of gas. So just be careful about version 1.3 if you find it for cheap, okay? So anyway, now food is software. Energy is software. Healthcare is essentially digital. And now we get to the final piece, which is reality. How many of you have tried the Oculus Rift? Okay. If you've not tried this, if you get a chance, please try the Oculus Rift. It's essentially an iPhone taped to your head in a scuba mask, right? If you change your perspective, the perspective changes. So here's a guy trying the Oculus Rift for the first time. That's his left eye and right eye perspective at the bottom. He's about to go over a virtual roller coaster. Watch his reaction in this. Oh, by the way, he is a very experienced gamer. He plays World of Warcraft and Doom all the time, okay? So here's a very experienced gamer playing Oculus Rift for the first time.
Go ahead.
Watch his reaction.
Go ahead.
So he's just about to go over the edge of the roller coaster.
Holy crap!
And over he goes. And what you're seeing is his physiology. Okay, what you saw there, his physiology is fundamentally disrupted. Okay? And the inflection point, we always look for inflection points when we look for new technologies. The inflection point here is virtual reality now disrupts reality. Because that virtual roller coaster can do way more interesting things than a real roller coaster. And now they're treating people with this for fear of heights, fear of dark, fear of water, very, very effectively. Okay? And so this is the world that we're living into. Food is digital, healthcare is digital, energy is digital, reality is digital. So as you think about becoming an entrepreneur, think about two things. One is, where can you find new information streams to harness? Okay? And the second is, how do you enter a marketplace with low cost of supply? And if you can do those two things, you are essentially unstoppable. So thank you very much for your time. It's great to be here. Thank you. We've left some time for We've left some time for questions. If you have some Q&A, I covered a few different areas there, so yeah. Shout it out and I'll repeat the question. Spanish or English? Okay. Here comes a mic. Wait, he's running around.
So we talked to us about many different technologies that are advancing exponentially. And I think most of people will fear these advancements.
Yes.
And I know people think, well, I'm probably a doctor, and he's just telling me that an app will outdo my work. So how is your vision about the future, about this, about common people that cannot really get that into these technologies? Do you see it as fatalist, thinking, oh, there will be tons of people that don't have a job? Or would you see it as progress and that people don't need to do those jobs and we need new jobs? That would be my question.
That's a big question. Okay, so 2 or 3 things there. First is, how do we think about this explosion of technologies and what happens to people's jobs as a result? And what about the resistance that people might have to these technologies, right? So let me address each of those. So you are very correct in that we will see huge resistance to these new technologies, right? You look at Uber and the fight that's having, right? Uber has a very direct strategy to just break the law, get straight through to public acceptance, and then the law will have to change, right? So it's working very well, their strategy, unless you're French, in which case you just ban Uber. And so the only real way in which these technologies will progress is if we break the current systems and current structures. And what often happens in these domains, whether it's doctors or taxi drivers, you get a guild mentality, right? The lawyers guild thinks we're the only people that can practice law. And AI can do a much better job at law than a person because your capabilities are much higher. But human beings don't like that. And so you have the guild mentality. If you go to a doctor today, you get the wrong diagnosis about 35% of the time, okay? 7 years of full-time training, that's not a great track record, right? But if I can do this, much more interesting. So what we'll see, the most powerful systems we've seen is when you have AI along with a human being, okay? With the judgment and nuance that comes with being a human being. With AI powering it is the best systems that we've seen, say in chess or other areas. So in the healthiest environments, we'll see AI and human interaction to look at medicine or healthcare, etc. Now, there's many areas where it just doesn't make sense. Like, if you're a truck driver, you're going to be automated, right? Because to drive a car autonomously, you don't need artificial human intelligence, you need artificial horse intelligence, and we have that. We've been flying planes perfectly happily for decades now without this. The first self-driving truck is operating today, licensed in Nevada. Okay? Now, the #1 job application in the middle of the US is truck driver. 12 million jobs essentially will disappear over time. Now, for them, you essentially say, well, you have to upgrade. Right? So we don't worry about a loss of jobs, because we found that when there's a new technology injection, we don't necessarily lose jobs, they just change. In Germany, we've automated completely all of the factories. Employment has not dropped, it's increased. Okay? Because there's so much work to be done to do problem solving, creative design, etc. It becomes a retraining issue, not a job loss issue. Okay? But human beings don't like to change. And so this is the big challenge. And the big challenge we have as a society is technology is moving faster at an accelerated pace. All of our human systems are linear, sublinear, right? And so that's the big challenge. And so we don't know easily how to address it. We've never seen this before. We've never seen so many technologies moving so fast, right? And how will we license it? So you look at focus at will, music to help you focus, okay? How do you regulate that? How do you ensure public safety, right? All sorts of questions will come up, and we don't have an easy answer. I'll give you a couple of examples of the breakdown in our regulatory structures. We're in the higher education world. If you're in higher education today, if you're doing a master's degree in one of these areas that we teach, advanced robotics, biotech, neuroscience, by the time you finish your degree, you're out of date. So today, our ability to teach a subject cannot keep pace with the changes in the subject area. Huge issue. Also, say in medicine, we do clinical trials to assess whether something is safe or not, right? Well, today we're now giving dosage of a drug based on your genetic profile. Your DNA sequence determines the dosage of a drug. So we're getting to what's called personalized medicine, where the dosages are personalized to you. How do you do clinical trials if your sample size is 1? That's a structural issue. So we need to completely redo how we do medical regulatory. And so we have these very fundamental issues on the table, and our existing government structures cannot make this change. They're not set up for it. We actually need to re-architect all of our regulatory structures. Okay? So that's our biggest concern that we have. There's a question back here somewhere. Okay, let's go back there with the mic, and then we'll go there. Yeah. Spanish or English?
English.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I think I have a headset somewhere. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Salim, to be here. I want to say you that I was listening you and I understand very well about the linear thinking versus exponential thinking along the time and along the place. And then I have entrepreneur project that consists in innovate social economy system. And when you were speaking about the curve of the exponential, I see in my project this curve. And I want to work with you in this innovation of it's a social economy system to export.
Hang on a second. Do you have a question?
And my question is, how can I work with your company to make this social economic system with you and your company?
Got it. Vivian, can you stand up for a second? Vivian Lan is one of our alumni from our summer program. She runs all of our alumni community here in Mexico. Right? So talk to Vivian and she can kind of connect you with the rest of the organization and we can help if that's working, okay?
Thank you.
Okay. Sorry to put you on the spot. Question over there, and then we'll go over here. Or 2 questions here. Yeah. And then over there. All right, we'll get there. Yeah. English or Spanish?
English.
Okay.
I have a question. For example, I am studying my career here in Mexico, and if I would like to go to that university, what my chances are, as you know, like I have to work, I don't have that kind of money to go to another country and study. What are my chances as a Mexican girl to go and have those and learn all those things that you have?
Okay. First of all, Vivian is the best person to talk to because she's a Mexican girl and she got into Singular. But let me answer your question. We now have about 3,000 alumni in 85 countries over our 7 years, right? The cost is actually now 0. Google actually funds our entire summer program, so it costs nothing to now attend Singularity University. That's the good news. The bad news is because of that, thousands of people are applying. We now get 5,000 applicants from 120 countries fighting over 80 slots. Like if I applied, I'd never get in. It's just one of those. That's one of those types of places. Okay. What we look for is somebody with a good academic background. Right? So we want a good, because we throw a lot of information at you, and we want to see that you have the ability to absorb that information. The second thing, you have to have demonstrated leadership skills already. Have you run a company? Have you built an NGO? Have you run student politics? Because we're not set up to teach leadership in our short program. The third thing we look for is demonstrated interest in solving big problems. Okay? So if you say, hey, I think hunger is a big problem, that's one level. If you say hunger is a big problem and here are the 4 ways I would go about solving it, that's better. If you say that's a big problem and here are the 6 NGOs I've set up to try and address it, you're in. right? Because we want to see people who've actually done things out in the world, because when we can give them awareness of what's happening, they will act on it much more aggressively. And so we look for that. As a woman, you have a much higher chance of getting in, because our classes are about 50-50, but we get about 15 to 17% women applicants to men applicants. Okay? So there you go. Yeah.
Can I do the question?
Oh, pause just for a second. Sorry, one last thing. We've released a lot of our lectures online for free. So if you go to our YouTube channel, which is Singularity U, you'll see like 40, 50 hours of lectures that you can watch on the future of biotech, AI, robotics in detail. Okay? Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, for a long time I've been frustrated living in this planet, in this epoch, with this technology. But a few years ago,
you seem too happy to be unhappy.
Yeah. Now I am happy because I am hopeful that with this exponential growth, we can achieve some interesting thing. We see that everything is digitalizing, isn't it? So all living things are information that is transformed in an organic hardware.
Yes.
So, in your experience, how is going to be the day when we ourselves digitalize?
Completely.
Completely, of course, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. If you look at a 10-year-old texting, you were kind of halfway there already. So we have actually been steadily progressing the integration of the human being with technology, right? You wear spectacles, you're a transhumanist. You've augmented yourself with technology, right? The minute you get a vaccination as a child, you're technically a cyborg, okay? So we've been very steadily using technology to expand and augment the human experience for hundreds and hundreds of years. We're now hitting an inflection point where we can exponentially accelerate that. Now, we are so complex that we don't know how to fully digitalize, right? We don't know there's a physical component to the world, but there's also field theory, there's energetic patterns that go back and forth, there's intuitive thinking, there's creative thinking that comes from we don't know where. Our understanding is very, very limited, okay? We have 100 billion neurons like for example, we have exquisite knowledge about the inner workings of a mosquito. We know exactly how a mosquito works. We are very far away from creating even something as basic as a mosquito. So we're a long ways away from replicating life in a way. But we have an easy way of replicating a human being. You get a man and a woman, and they can create another human being, right? And so that works pretty well. Digitizing that, we're augmenting the human experience, but we're not replacing it. If you look at the Hollywood scenario, the Hollywood movies will show that AI and robots take over the world, and it's your amygdala being tickled, right? If we're lucky, we're treated as pets. If we're unlucky, we're food. Essentially, that's how it goes. But actually, what we see in real life is we're augmenting the human species. If I leave the house without my smartphone, I'm less human because my memory's in there. I can't video with my son. I can't empathize with anybody around the planet. I don't know what my friends are doing. So you could argue that the boundary of who I am now exists around that device, right? So we're using technology to augment the human experience very, very aggressively on an exponential basis. We will solve cancer by the end of this decade, for example. We know that. Shortly after that, by the way, we're going to solve and cure aging. So that will have some interesting impacts. And so that will have a huge implication, right? Imagine you can live for an arbitrarily long period of time. What does that do to, you talked about social structures, what does that do to pension plans, retirement planning, unemployment benefits, et cetera, right? So huge questions around that. So, and that will happen within the next 20 years, okay? And so one of the big issues that we have today is our experience. We used to operate in a world where the experience of the previous generation could teach and guide the next generation, right? But that's not true anymore. Today, the next generation is much smarter and operating on a completely different basis, right? So for many of us, when we turned 16, 17 years old, the first thing we did was to get a driver's license to get away from our parents, right? That's essentially what most of us do to get away from our parents. I have a 4-year-old son. He will never get a driver's license. So how do I convey to him, how do I even map onto that experience? In fact, he'll be drinking Soylent, sitting with a virtual reality headset in the basement, never doing anything else, right? So we have a very fundamental new world to live into. And we often make the mistake that the new generation must be bad because we don't understand it. We have to figure out how to navigate that in a slightly more mature way, okay? Other questions? Okay, question there, waving hand, and then we'll go here. Yeah.
Hi, I wanted to ask, like, for example, you said that we're going to increase our humanity. Wouldn't it, like, replace it? I study psychology, for example, and I've seen kids depend on the devices and such. Society right now, if we take all of the cell phones from these people and the Wi-Fi, we're at loss.
Yes.
I think there's a good side in advancing, but I also think that depending completely on a device or something will make us like not increase our humanity because we're not born with a device, but actually we're like depending on one. What do you think about it? Also, if we're all connected, it's easy for the people like that are using or creating those devices to also know and control information and such things. So how are we going to develop as humans without depending on these devices?
I love these easy questions. Okay, so a couple of things there. The first was, you're correct in that as we advance technology, we have the promise of the technology and we have the peril of the technology, right? If somebody with biotech could accidentally or deliberately wipe out the planet, I mean, you could do that inadvertently or deliberately today, create a virus that would kill everybody and it would be a problem, right? How do we make sure we get the positive benefits of that, not the negative benefits? Now, on the device issue, I will argue that we've been steadily using technology to augment ourselves anyway. I mentioned the vaccination, right? That doesn't change my humanity that much. What we found that technology does is augments what's inside me already. If I'm a musician today, I can more effectively compose music than, say, 10 years ago. And so my raw creativity is expanded as well as the capability, right? And so then it depends on what's inside us, right? And now that becomes the real challenge. Something else that's interesting, as human beings, we actually crave who we are is the relationship we have with our fellow people. That's what gives identity, right? And as we can digitally connect with lots and lots of people, it gives us a different definition of identity. Now, our old ways to relate to that is bad, but you can also relate to it as good. I'll give you a quick story. A couple of years ago, we had one of the world's leading linguists come to Singularity. And in the Q&A, I said to him, it must be a depressing time to be a language expert, right? People are not even using spelling, they're not using grammar, they're using emoticons. Language is essentially disintegrating. It must be kind of depressing to be a linguist today. And he said, no, actually, it's one of the most exciting times because when you look at the use of emoticons and emojis in messages, it's the first time in the history of human language that we can symbolically convey emotion. We've never been able to do that before. So he's really excited about the possibilities of programmatic emotions in that sense, right? And he showed me a fascinating video of an argument between a mother and a 12-year-old daughter. And he was putting a documentary together. The mother is saying to the daughter, who the hell are you texting with? Thousands and thousands of text messages, SMS a day. The daughter says, I don't know how to answer that question. That goes very quickly into an argument. They separate the two, and they take the daughter aside, and they say, why is it so hard to answer the question? All she wants to know is who you're texting with. And the daughter says, I'm texting with 50 people. Which of the 50 is she talking about? And you realize there's a very fundamental gap in how the elder generation thinks about the world and how the younger generation thinks about the world. And it's not necessarily bad. It's just very different. Now, the positive side of this technology, you're correct that with this much connectedness, we can have one company or a government doing bad things with it, right? Actually, the worst actors with new technology are existing governments, spying on people with impunity. Individuals seem to be doing a pretty good job of it, but the governments are a bad actor in this case. But what it also does, that transparency also allows us to keep an eye on what's going on. The president of Syria, Assad, would be killing 10 times more people if the world wasn't watching, right? So by keeping eyes on it, we're actually able to save more people than otherwise, because if he has to only kill people at night, and he has to do it where there's no communication, et cetera, et cetera. And so we're finding little by little we're improving the human condition, but it's certainly a very different world, and we have to get used to that different world. Okay? A couple more questions. There's a question, there's one here, and then one at the back, and then one here. Yeah, sir.
What are the biggest challenges for these disruptive ideas in terms of politics and religion?
I love these talks. What are the biggest challenges in politics and religion? Okay. How controversial do I want to get? Okay. Religion has a particular difficulty today because religions are based on what are called assumptive truths or absolute truths, right? Jesus is the Son of God, Mary was a virgin, Muhammad is the last prophet. It's an assumptive truth that you have to take as faith and then operate from then on. Whereas the world doesn't really operate that way. The world relies on relative truths that can be verified. Science operates on verifiable truths that can be constantly improved. And so there's a particular tension around religions which operate on absolute truths, okay? So that's one, and also if you think about, if we get to immortality or an indefinite life extension, that poses a huge problem for religions, right? Many religions, their business model is to sell an afterlife, right? And so they won't like that their business model is disappearing. And so that poses a big problem for religions in that sense. From a political perspective, we have a huge challenge. I will make an argument that democracy is not compatible with 1 trillion sensors coming down the pipe. It's too hard to manage, there's too much information swirling around, and trying to move a whole population is hard to do when so much information can be misrepresented. You look at the US political situation, the US is not a functioning democracy in any way today. Okay, so we have some very fundamental structural issues. My family was very involved in the independence movement in India in the 40s and 50s. It's great that it's a democracy. In 60 years, no infrastructure has been laid down, right? And so we have some particular issues with democracy. We need to figure out what the future of that looks like. And we don't have an easy answer to that. Okay, we actually need to figure out how to handle it. For example, if I read all of the tweets and blog posts in Mexico, I could use AI to formulate a privacy policy much more effectively than the government could, because I can do machine learning and understand what everybody's perceptions were and do that in real time, right? So we can kind of automate policy to a certain level. But our governmental and political structures are very human, which makes them really slow, right? I'll give you another perspective on this. When you look at the sharing economy, Uber, Airbnb, Waze, et cetera, this whole new sharing economy, I use a phrase that's technological socialism. Technology will actually deliver the promises of the political movement without the mess of the human beings being involved. So we can now share resources much more effectively, enabled by technology in a much more fair way. And so we're going to see some fascinating new developments in that will hopefully leach into the political sector. But unfortunately for now, politics is one of those areas we have no idea how you fix with technology. Okay? All right, a couple more questions. There's a question back there, and then we'll go here. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm David. I have a very simple question. In Mexico, as in any other third world countries, we have different challenges than in first world countries. And we have different kinds of solving those kind of problems. I read your book. I agree on most of the concepts of the book. And the most important thing that I'm wondering is if you could give us an advice as a country to focus our efforts in some specific areas, in which, of course, we can do more in those areas, and of course, not lose some of our resources in areas that we are not going to perform.
Yeah, great question. So what can Mexico do to take advantage of its current situation and leapfrog the rest of the world? How's that? Is that a good way? Okay, I would pick on a couple of areas. So one, I would look at using the blockchain to deliver new types of goods and services, government goods and services, that takes out the corruption. You can solve corruption using the blockchain to a certain part. So if you can do that, 200 other countries in the world will want to know how you did it, right? So that's one. Second thing I would do, I would look at new education models. Our education system today is fundamentally broken. And you could use the current situation. Europe can't fix itself, the US can't fix itself. You have the opportunity here to create entirely new education models. The Tec de Monterrey is a great example at the graduate and the university level. But primary education is fundamentally broken, elementary education, high school, all completely broken. And if you re-architected that, you would then have a huge export industry. Third thing I would do is medical tourism. I would train up a set of doctors in using the Tricorder X Prize and do that over the internet, and you could create an export industry very, very quickly. So those are three examples I'll throw out to you easily. Okay? All right, question here. Who's got the mic? Okay, we have time for like 2 more questions. I'm making him run as fast as possible. Okay, we'll go there and then there. Yeah.
Okay, so when you talk about all these great exponential growth in science and the people that are going to have to be retrained for their jobs, we actually don't know, well, many of us are not aware of all these technologies going on, and you guys are. Do you feel there's like a responsibility to, I mean, you have 80 people admitted every year?
Per summer, but we also have executive programs every 2 months, that 80 people at a time, so yeah.
Okay, but these people are kind of like destined to do those great things or like invent new things. Do you have like a program that contemplates training people to retrain people?
Yes, in fact, many of our programs are designed exactly for that. So when we select for our summer program, right, 5,000 applicants, we're looking for 80 people. Who we're looking for is who do we think is going to run these countries in the next 10 or 20 years. If we can bring them in and give them this awareness as they rise to leadership levels in their countries, they'll operate in a much more effective way than our current leadership. Okay? So the Chief Innovation Officer for Mexico is one of our alumni. The Chief Economist in the Dominican Republic is one of our alumni. The Chief of Staff to Shimon Peres, the President of Israel, is one of our alumni. So we're starting to get to this level. We meet with heads of big companies all the time today. And so we're starting to get to that level of it and that level of awareness. And with our summer program, we don't think we can fix the existing leadership in the world. The people is not the problem, it's the structures, right? If somebody from the US government comes to our program, great. When they go back to Washington, they're stuck. That's the issue. So what we're trying to do is, with our summer program, find the future leaders of the world and lift them up to this level of awareness. With our existing executive programs, when we talk to business executives, we basically say, look, adapt or retire. Or, just pick one and do it. And so we urge people to look for or fund that next generation. And the third thing that we do is by actively launching these projects, we want to demonstrate that this future is actually here. It's not theoretical. Nothing I showed you today is some future perspective, right? It's all real now. And so very profound change is happening, and getting that across is a big challenge for us. And we try and do this online as much as possible. The problem that we have is because it's such a transformational, visceral education, it doesn't lend itself to an online environment very easily. So we're trying to figure that out. Okay? because I almost lost my biology there. Okay, other questions. Yeah, question here, and then we'll have a last question there. And a question. Okay, go ahead.
All right. With this all changes, when do we humans become unreliable? And when we get to the point that we automate everything, what is our objective?
Wait, hold on a second. When do humans become reliable?
Reliable, or yes, when do we humans become unreliable?
Unreliable.
Unreliable, yeah.
We're pretty unreliable now. I think that you could say that pretty safely. I think the bigger question is what happens to all the jobs? That's really the question. Okay. We have seen throughout history that when we have a big technology injection, like the printing press, the Industrial Revolution, etc., that we had a temporary job displacement, but then employment went up. Okay? And we've seen that like 10 times in a row. 100 years ago, 50% of the US workforce was in agriculture. 50%. Today it's 1.8% because we've automated farming in the Western world, right? Now it's not like 53% are out of work. They've done doing other things like web developer and accountant, and we can't imagine the jobs that will exist in 5 years. Think about the jobs that exist today. They didn't exist 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So we don't know the jobs that will exist. We tend to struggle with a zero-sum mentality. We think that once a truck driver loses his job, there's nothing else he can do, right? But there's actually an infinite number of things they can do. And we found throughout history that we can retrain people effectively, especially when you can move them up the value chain. If you're working in a factory doing this, nobody really wants to be doing that. They're doing it because they have to, not because they want to, right? When you automate that, you force them up the value chain, now they have to use their mind more, then it becomes much more interesting. And the creative and problem-solving aspects of humanity are very far from being automated. Okay? So we tend to be very optimistic about the world. So we're very biased that way. But in general, we see the world getting much, much better because of technology. Technology has been the major driver of progress since the beginning of time. Maybe it's the only major driver of progress that we've ever seen. But now we have a dozen technologies moving very fast. We're hugely excited, right? When you have free energy, then clean water becomes easy, healthcare becomes easy, food becomes easy, right? So we're totally not worried about resources, clean water, food, energy, natural resources. We're very worried about jobs from the social transition perspective. We're very worried about climate change as an environmental issue, okay? So, last question. I hope it's a good one.
Ok. Gracias por estar en México. La pregunta es en español.
Hold it a second. I need a headset to translate. Or can somebody translate the question? Daniel will translate. Go ahead, ask the question, and Daniel will translate.
Okay. Al ser México uno de los países que más adolece de tecnología, si usted fuera el presidente de México, ¿cuáles serían los retos que enfrentaría para las empresas de servicio convertirlas y transformarlas en empresas exponenciales?
Okay. If I was the president of Mexico, what would I do? I would do 2 or 3 things. I would set up some entrepreneurship labs and maker spaces that leverage these new technologies and teach these technologies, right? To the earlier question, if we can teach these technologies to a broad population, then very powerful things will result. So I would take these courses, I would put them on TV, and I would have every kid watch these lectures, right? So that would be one. So now you have the base population trained in a particular way. The second thing I would do is I would teach entrepreneurship as a discipline and as a skill in high school, okay? Before you get to university, teach it in high school, okay? And teach that early. The earlier you teach that, the better the kids will be practiced. I would put the teaching of programming and software development right into 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 6-year-old kids, okay? And the last thing I would do is I would change the psyche of the Mexican people to be more confident. And the way I would do that is I would have a risk takers award, okay? So I would find every year the 20 people that took the biggest risk and failed, and I would give them a huge prize. I would put them on TV, create a cultural acceptance of taking risk and trying new things. And then you'll change the culture, plus you'll have the skill set, and you'll totally transform Mexico. Okay? With that, thank you very much. It's been great to be here. Thank you.
Salim,
Thank you.
thank you very much for giving us the opportunity.
Grab my thing.
Fuerte aplauso, por favor, para el señor Salim.
Thank you very much. Very welcome.